The tumblestone carried moonlight like a silver blade, its surface sheathed and unsheathed with every turn of the current. Catelyn stood with her hands wrapped in her cloak and watched the dark glimmer pass under Riverrun's red stone walls. The banners along the battlements barely stirred. Far downriver, a night fisherman's lamp moved as if a star had fallen and learned to drift upon black water. She had not slept. Sleep and grief were poor bedfellows, and the grim arithmetic of war made a bed colder still. Somewhere in those calculations, the face of her daughter kept surfacing. Sansa with eyes too old for her years. Arya all elbows and mischief turned to smoke and rumor. And when she tried to steady the sums, she found only her father's words, family, duty, honor. They did not align cleanly. They never had. Boots paced on the wall walk above, counting time with winter's patience. The castle smelled of damp stone and ashes, of the river's clean wet breath. Behind her, Riverrun's yards lay dim and quiet, broken by the sough of the willow by the inner gate and the soft clink of chain from the smithy where some apprentice had fallen asleep before banking the fire. A horse snorted in the stables, living warmth, then silence. The keys hung heavy at her belt. Every time she shifted, an iron tooth tapped another. She was not supposed to bear them. Casting herself back to girlhood, she remembered the way her father's keyring had sounded on his belt. By that sound she could tell whether he was weary or vexed, or only thinking, and she had loved him for being all three at once, and how the men-at-arms took the keys from him at night, with their heads bowed. No one took keys from her now. She had insisted. If she would be accounted the fool that unbarred the wrong door, let them all see who touched the lock. The weight would either steady her or crush her, as river weight could steady a ship or sink it. She turned from the water and went down. The air cooled as she descended, stone swallowing sound, torches thinning to oiled shadows. The passages beneath Riverrun were broad and dry for a river castle. Old Tully cunning, and the triune walls that made the place a stubborn knot, and Catelyn's steps whispered more than rang. 2 Tully men flanked the last turn, helms tucked under their arms, as if unwilling to bring steel ears so near to what was caged below. They straightened when she came. They were boys, both of them. All her sentries were boys, these days. War burned men like kindling. "My lady," one said, as if he were discovering the shape of courtesy as he spoke. "Sir Desmond?" she asked. "In the cell, lady. The big maid is with him." Catelyn nodded, and the boy colored in the torchlight. Not from shame, but from the strange jostle of words, big maid, and what they may or may not be permitted to mean. Brienne had learned to carry that word as a shield. It did not always hold. The keys answered her hand with a gritty click. The last iron door opened with the reluctant scrape of a blade, leaving a sheath it had no wish to quit. Jaime Lannister lifted his head from the straw. He had been beautiful once. He still was in a way that clung to him like arrogance, even after the beating and the collar and a month of stone. Golden hair grown wild did not apologize for the damp. The line of his jaw did not defer to bruises new or old. The cell's hungry torchlight admired him, as torches admired gold. His eyes, green, sharp, amused, found her at once, then moved to weigh the keyring at her belt. "Again?" he said. "Your company becomes a habit, my lady. I shall soon be writing sonnets." Words cheapen in a place like this," she said, and Brienne, who had only nodded as Catelyn entered, made a sound that might have been agreement. "On the contrary," Jaime said, "in prison, words cost dear. There's nothing else to spend." Catelyn took the stool by the bars. She had done this too often. She felt the grooves of the wood in her bones. She did not sit because she sought him. She sat because in choosing to keep him, she had chosen the weight of his being, and if she could not lift it from the war, she would at least be honest in taking it upon herself in the hours when others slept. She had come here the night she received the raven carrying a scrap of hope tied to a noose of dread, a line about Sansa's embroidery under the Queen's eye, a whisper that Arya had been sighted near the Riverlands, and then not, a rumor that turned to ash when prodded. Jaime Lannister was leverage, a word men loved, as if it were a blade. In truth, He was a face. A father's son. A sister's brother. A promise coin the realm had minted to pay for other people's peace. She hated that she could see him that way. She loathed that she could not see him otherwise. "You carry keys tonight," he said. His eyes ran over them as a gambler's would over the dice. A dangerous fashion. Keys and compassion seldom keep company for long. "My compassion is for my daughters," Catelyn said. "Mine too," he said, and she watched his mouth warp around that claim, as if he did not know whether it should be jest or dagger. "There. Now we are both noble." "Lannister." Brienne leaned a shoulder into the stone, arms folded. The torch skipped light across the white enamel of her gorget. Her jaw was set in that earnest hardship that made men laugh until they saw her hold a blade. Then they laughed less. Jaime had been trying to wormscrew into her pride for days. It refused to take him. Perhaps he enjoyed the pressure as much as he would have enjoyed victory. "I have had a raven," Catelyn said, because silence would only breed another jest. "From King's Landing." "From my sister," Jaime said, and he did not bother to disguise the hunger in the words. "You carry keys. Surely that means—" "It means," Catelyn said, and let the pause be deliberate, "that when I finish here, I must go bar the window in my son's council chamber against the river fog. The draft has been waking him after midnight." He smiled, the way a cat might smile, if it were able to show teeth at human jokes. "You are cruel." "I am his mother," she said, and let the words sit like stones. "You know what that means." "I know what that means," he said. And for an instant, the smile went somewhere she could not follow. "I know it so well I chose to be other things." "Kingslayer," Brienne said. He glanced at her. "It is a marvel, watching you fit your mouth around the word as if it were a prayer. Do you kneel when you say it alone? Kingslayer. Do you make holy signs with those big hands?" "I say what is," Brienne said. "You murdered a king." "They all want me to have done it for the right reason," he murmured, almost to himself. "They would forgive me then." "No," Brienne said, after a beat that was not quite puzzlement. "They would forgive you for the right reason, not the right deed." Catelyn had heard that thought in her father's voice long ago. Her chest tightened. The torch hissed. The river spoke to stone. The castle remembered to breathe. "The queen writes of my children," Jaime said, drawing himself back to them, a man reeling thread onto a spool. "She writes that my son plays at siege with carved soldiers, no bigger than a thumb. She writes that my daughter's hair is the color of a wheat field at harvest. She writes about prayers and candles, and the thousand little virtues the pious invent when they cannot have what they want." He fixed his eyes on Catelyn. "She writes to remind you that I am a father too." "You are a father," Catelyn said, and the word tasted like iron. If she spoke of the boy king, her mouth would shape a lie. So she did not. "I have counseled my son to seek a formal exchange." She watched the flash in Jaime's face. "To send true envoys under safe conduct, with proper oaths witnessed. To propose that Lord Tyrion Lannister or Lord Tywin himself name terms for returning Sansa to our custody, in return for your safe delivery to King's Landing." The torch bat a spark. In the corridor, one of the boys shifted his weight. "Tywin will gnash his teeth," Jaime said softly. "He will call you craven for asking fair payment for what he would name treachery. Then he will weigh. He will weigh, as he always weighs. And my sister will never forgive him if the scale does not tip." "I do not believe in forgiveness as currency," Catelyn said. "But I know the feel of a scale." "And if they refuse?" Jaime asked. She did not answer him. She did not have to. He could see the nails driven into her silence. He could see what she would do and what she would refuse to do. And how that refusal could be forced out of being by a different refusal somewhere down the river. She rose. The stool put a thin ache in her hips, as if the wood had borrowed her weight and would only return it in coin. "Lady Stark," Jaime said, as her hand found the keys again. "Keep me here if you must. Guard me with maid and boys, with 100 men. with a pack of hounds and a priest. Bind me to the wall with my own pride. But be certain, a man is a thing that leaks. He leaks lies and truth and fear. In time, he leaks away. The river keeps what it takes," she said, and left him his straw. Brienne followed her to the stairs. Against the upward cold, the taller woman's breath smoked. The iron door fell shut behind them like a verdict. "You did right," Brienne said. "I did what I could keep," Catelyn said, and felt the obscure relief of the words as if she had poured water from a heavy jar and seen the surface still. She wanted to tell Brienne about a night in Winterfell when Arya had been lost and then found chasing a cat through the crypts. How she had shaken with anger and held the child too tight, smelling dust and torch smoke and stubborn joy. She wanted to say that love made fools of duty and then dared duty to call that folly sin. Instead she said, "There will be attempts." Brienne nodded. "I will stand the watch, my lady." "You will share it," Catelyn said. "Sleep when I tell you. Eat when Sir Desmond orders it. Pride is a horse that throws its rider." Brienne's eyes, which were too honest to be clever and too clever to be pure, met hers. "He will try to make me mad with words. He will try to make you something," Catelyn said. "Refuse to be made." When she reached the council chamber, she found the window unbarred, and the river's breath worrying the candle flames. She barred it with her own hands. The knight stooped closer. Maps lay upon the long table like skins, pinned and drawn and written on by a hunter who might be stalking the men whose skin they resembled. Edmure had left a cup half drunk. A fly had chosen it for its grave. 3 chairs stood at odd angles, as if the men who had occupied them had left in 3 different moods that tugged the wood after their temper. She sat where her father had sat, where her son sat now. The chair had the most modest carving. Hoster Tully's taste was all in stone and bridgework and river gates. She remembered him at this table with the blackfish's hand upon the map, and young Edmure's laugh spilling too bright for the subject at hand. She remembered her mother's hands on a folded letter. The memory had weight, as if the dream were a polished stone she could draw from her pocket and press into her palm warm. The keys knocked once against the table's edge. She set them aside with care. War was never a single calculation. It was 1,000 counters slid across 1,000 boards, and the boards lay stacked and crooked, and sometimes a piece tumbled through. She had not freed Jaime. That removed one board. No, it made one board heavier and lifted another into view. Great John Umber would sleep easier. Rickard Karstark might not fill a corridor with blood. Or he might. Rage did not sleep easily. If the squires lived another day, they would carry that day's mourning into the next. And if a man living was a coin for the future, then perhaps the tally changed. Perhaps not. And if Tywin Lannister weighed as Jaime said, then the scales would rock, and all the little hands in King's Landing would scramble to push. A soft knock at the door made the candle's shoulders lean. "Enter," she said. Her uncle, the Blackfish, slipped inside and closed the door as silently as if it were the river's own skin he was moving between his fingers. His face had been carved out of an old quarrel with time. The mouth could still be cruel, but it had learned when cruelty was use. His gray eyes touched the keys, then her face, then the window bar she had lowered. He said nothing of any of those things. "You will not sleep," he said, and it was not a question. "Nor you," she said. True enough. He came to the table, looked down at the map as if expecting it to have shifted while his back was turned. Edmure's scouts report Sellsword sniffing at the outfarms again. Strangers who prefer the smell of horse to that of hay. Vargo Hote's kind. Worse than the bloody mummers is the sort who consider them honorable. Hote could be hired to attempt the dungeons, Catelyn said. If Tywin will not bargain, he will scheme. The Blackfish's mouth shaped itself around the name Tywin without speaking it, as if he could eat it and rob it of its flavor. "We've doubled the guard," he said. "I've put men on the river gates who remember what oaths smell like. Brienne holds the turn with Sir Desmond. I'd trust those 2 to stand against a sow in heat." Catelyn felt the first ripple of something like ease. "And my son, Rob's not back from the western foraging," the Blackfish said. A raven from his outriders has him moving along the Blue Fork. The Lannisters gather south and east. Tywin has slipped King's Landing's chain around his own wrist and means to pull Stannis by it. Your boy's victory in the west has the old lion peevish, but it has not dulled his claws. Then so, I have asked Robb to send envoys to the capital, Catelyn said. She waited for the blow of her uncle's thought. He brought his fingers together neatly. A bold ask. A clean one. It will set the foxes to yipping. Good. Sometimes you want the sound. Nendanto. If Cersei refuses outright, Catelyn said, I will have her refusal written on oiled parchment with the seals of her counselors, and when the singing men come with their harps, they can read it in the soft places and see how it sounds then. The Blackfish's eyes warmed. It was a rare fire. There's Tully steel left, he said. It is not all in the river gates. When he left, she did not try to sleep. Dawn came like a question that no one had asked her permission to pose. The day steeled itself with the sound of hooves in the yard, and a whetstone song down at the armory. Men broke bread and drank ale and laughed. And above them all the ravens spoke their bright, harsh words, as if reciting a creed that no one had taught them. Catelyn stood at the parapet and watched the river find its way. By noon, Rickard Karstark demanded audience. He came into the solar like a storm crossing the winter sea, thin and high and bitter with salt. His beard had gone as white as a lord's winterfall, what remained of his hair sharper than wire. He smelled of mail and horse, and the iron that lives in a man's blood. His eyes were two knives. They had been knives since the Whispering Wood had stolen what they knew how to cut. My lady, he said, and he didn't so much bow as remove his head from the world for a moment to make the formality possible. I hear you've been to see the Kingslayer. Catelyn let the word pass. Lord Karstark. And I hear that instead of slitting the goat's throat and sending his head to Tywin, wrapped in a leopard banner, we are to parley like septas at a harvest dance. Is that how men do in Carhold? Catelyn asked. Do they kill prisoners wrapped in the banners of houses that are not theirs? Do they dance with knives until the gods are bored of the same tune? His eyes flashed, but his voice was patient, as if he were teaching a thick child to count. My son's blood cries out. Eddard and Torrhen bleed forever, unless the man who cut them down pays. If I cannot have sword for sword, I will have boy for boy. You keep Frey's whelp and Willem Lannister in your tower. If you will not give me the Kingslayer, give me his kin. Dendarau. Give you. The words were small in her mouth. She set them down gently, as one might set down a goblet that has just been found cracked. I am to give you 2 boys sent here under flag and oath, so that you may wash grief with murder, and show the realm that no oath binds us from the neck down. Oath, he said, and there was a music in the word that was not the kind that men play for dancing. An oath should bite both ways. The lion's oaths only bite the hind. I have no use for oaths that do not weep when mine do. If you kill boys, Catelyn said, you will teach Tywin Lannister that he may kill girls. You will teach him that the river runs no cleaner than his cup. His hands opened and closed, as if he were practicing strangling the air. Tywin has no need of lessons. He taught us all, and then taxed our understanding. Why do you think the Kingslayer still breathes? Because your son would not let me take it from him in the fever of battle. Because you hold your grief like a lady, and I hold mine like a man with a broken house. Because in the end you prefer pardon to justice. Nandaru. No, Catelyn said quietly. I prefer justice to vengeance. They only look the same when you squint. Behind him, through the unglazed arrow slit cut to the river, the water threw sunlight against the stone in a flicker that felt like speech. Karstark stood, not hearing it. He bowed then, too low and too slow, as if the bending would break him. When he straightened, something in him had sealed. Your son will lose the north before the crocuses bloom, he said without heat. Not for lack of courage, for want of salt. Women like salt. They sprinkle it on everything until their tongues can only taste their tears. When he was gone, the room felt larger and emptier, as if some part of the world had been pulled through the window and flung into the current. Catelyn sat a long time with her hands quiet in her lap and the keys silent beside them. She did not ring for wine. She did not call for any of the little normalcies that might have soothed a less irritated grief. She rose only when the trumpet on the outer wall blew two long and one short. Riders at the east gate, known. Robb returned before sunset, wet with rain and victory, and went first to the Godswood. Catelyn let him have it. It heartened her that he remembered. The boy who had stacked stones in Winterfell's hot springs to make islands for his toy soldiers had learned to send men to take real islands of real ground. The man returned to trees and listened and did not ask them for permission to be a better boy. He asked them to mark him another way. When he came to her, he smelled of leather and road dust and the emptiness that clings to the places where men have recently died. "Mother," he said, and kissed her cheek. "Uncle." The Blackfish measured him with the eyes that had counted his first steps and his first blood both. "The West still bleeds," he said. "And Tywin?" "Marching," Robb said. "Always marching, like an old bear with a thorn in his foot. He means to reach King's Landing before the storm breaks over Stannis, if it can be helped. I'd say he smells wedding perfume. But since when has Tywin danced?" "Since it suited him," the Blackfish said. Robb's mouth was a line. When they told him of the envoy plans, he lifted an eyebrow. Then, unexpectedly, laughed. "Gods," he said, "to watch Tyrion's face. He will enjoy the juggle and pretend to deplore it. He'll write a letter cunning enough to repave the road from here to Harrenhal. Then he'll put Joffrey's seal on it like a cherry on a bowl of rancid cream." "You will send the envoys," Catelyn said. "I will," he said, "with enough banners to drape the map. ... With true knights who could be believed by men who still know how to believe. And with a singer or two, at that. Let the capital ring with the tune. Mentor no one." "The tune could be swallowed by the drums of war," the Blackfish said. "Then we will make the drums play in it," Robb said, his eyes alight with a dangerous youth that had not been completely flensed away by the year. "Mother, if Tywin says no, then he stands before the realm with his trousers around his ankles and a face like a stone. And if he says yes, he must trust us with his blood, a thing he cannot stand. Either way, I am content." "Nendi." "Content," Catelyn echoed. "Do not marry the word to your heart. It's a quick widowmaker." He looked as if he would say something soft, and then the Blackfish's glance cut him. "Edmure wants you," her uncle said. "He has news about the levies and the fishers in the outmarsh. Also, he has a fly in his wine he's saving to show you." Robb grimaced. "We cannot lose Edmure. Who would teach the South how to make faces at the North? Tell him the fly is to be knighted." "I'll come." When they were gone, Catelyn went once more to the cell. Night had gathered itself without asking permission from the men who wished to drink a little longer in the yard. Jaime was awake. Brienne stood with her arms folded, and the two boys drowsed by the door, their heads not quite daring to touch. "You will send envoys," Jaime said before she spoke. "I feel it in the stone." "Stone does not wag tongues," Brienne said. "It listens," he said. "Then it tells a man who has lain upon it too long." "The capital will call you hostage," Catelyn said. "They will call me every name they have not called me already," he said. "Your daughter will be named a pawn. My sister will play her as a queen. It has always been so. I wonder which of them learned the game first." "Do not speak of my daughter," Brienne said, fiercely enough that the boys at the door almost woke. Jaime turned his head to look at her. "Why? Because your love for Catelyn Stark's daughter is pure? My love is not. Therefore only yours should be uttered. I am greedy for their lives. That is a kind of love. It is not as pretty as yours, but it kills just as many men in the end. I will not let you make this uglier than it is," Brienne said. "And yet," he said, "ugliness tends to itself. Like rot, like truth." Catelyn let them talk, because talk was safer than silence at this hour. She thought of Sansa practicing her courtesies with the care of a girl learning to walk in a dress too long for her. She thought of Arya's winter quick feet. She thought, "I keep a man in a cell to measure their lives." The gods counted that arithmetic before men were born. The thought sat down with her like a companion who did not ask for bread. Before midnight, the attempt came. It had the smell of cruelty done by cowards and the carefulness of men who wished not to be known later for their failure. The dungeon corridor was dark earlier than it should have been. The torches had guttered and not been replaced. The boys had been woken for a piss by a hand that clamped their mouths and turned their sleep into the soft obedience of the drugged. Brienne's eyes adjusted more quickly than most men's. She had learned to see in rooms where she was not wanted. And when she heard the first hiss of rope, she had her blade in hand as if the sword had been waiting inside her arm. They came like cats, long and quiet, soft-shod and smelling of oiled leather. 5 by the count of her eyes. One with a hook for a left hand, another with a scar that looked like a boil peeled by a dull knife along the jaw. One who wore good boots that did not belong in the company of the others. They had a key. It was a good key. It had been filed by a careful man, by candlelight, to fit the lock well enough that only an honest locksmith would have cursed the tolerances. Brienne did not say a word. She moved forward into the first man's breath and struck him across the face with her left fist, the steel of her vambrace turning bone into sound. His head hit the wall with a crack. The second slashed for her thigh, thinking to cut under the curve of plate. She took it on the greave and turned. The weight of her, too much for any of them, suddenly where their mathematics had not accounted for it. The third had the rope. She wrapped it around her forearm and pulled, and the man stumbled with a surprised grunt that went little more than a handspan into the air before the torchless dark swallowed it. She jerked him against the bars. The rope hissed like something alive, and Jaime's hand shot through the gap and closed upon a throat that had come too near. There was a muffled choking. There is always a muffled choking when a man learns how easily the tube in his neck can be crushed by another man's grip. The one with the good boots took a step back and reached for something under his cloak. Brienne stepped through the space where the rope danced, brought her blade low and then up, not aiming to kill, aiming to unhand. The dagger fell. His good boot slid in the blood that had begun, as it must, to find the stone. He went down with a curse that suggested he owned the sort of words that could buy you a room in a castle if you spent them right. "Boy," Brienne said. And one of the drowsing guards blinked up into terror and then into training. "Torch," she said. His hands shook. The torch shook with them. Light fought its enemies. Jaime released the throat. The man slumped to the floor, lungs finding air as if it were new. The one with the hook hand was back up, and he had the sort of courage that makes a man more dangerous than his limbs suggest. He threw the hook at Brienne's face. She lifted her left arm to shield, and felt the iron catch in the joint between plates. The hook pulled. She did not go. She stepped into him instead, as if she meant to share his boots. Her forehead met his nose with a sound that pleased no one in the corridor. He fell backward, and would not be remembered kindly by the men who had paid him. In the cell, Jaime was laughing. It was not mad laughter. It was the laughter of a man watching his idea of the world adjust by degrees to accommodate one new fact. "There is a woman in it who can do this." "Enough," said the man with the good boots, not to Brienne but to the air, as if ordering change to go back into its skin. He sprang up and ran, and Brienne let him. She had the rope on her arm and the man against the bars and the hook in her vambrace. She was the center of a hard wheel, and could not afford to chase spokes. She disarmed the rope with a half-turn, and a step, and a twist that turned the man's wrist into a question. He dropped it. She stepped on it, cruelly. The boy's torch found her eyes. She did not blink. The men who could stand fled. Brienne did not pursue. She checked the boys with hands that felt the difference between a hurt that needed a laugh and a hurt that required stitching. The man whose throat Jaime had held coughed pink and would live to tell poor jokes about it. Hook hand bled and would linger in a physician's annoyance if the gods were kind. Perhaps he would dream of sows that bit. Catelyn came as soon as the noise rose to the level of news. She had slept not at all. The corridor stank of failure and blood, and the leftover breath of men who had not been brave, but had tried to look like it in the dark. Jaime stood too near the bars, his hands on the iron as if the metal were a lover he could not convince. There was a light in his face she had not seen before, as if some inward piece of him had laughed, and then refused to sit back down. "Your cell's words need better boots," he told her. She looked at Brienne. "You are unhurt?" "I will have a bruise under the hair," Brienne said, as if she were cataloging apples. "It will hurt when I take off my quay. Sir Desmond is seeing to the others. Send for Maester Vyman. The man on the floor may drown in his own blood if no one advises him not to." "Advise him not to," Catelyn said. Brienne knelt and spoke into the man's ruined nose with a folded cloth and the implacable kindness she offered all things that were broken and had not deserved it. Jaime watched her like a man at his first mummers show, delighted and a little sickened by the knowledge that he had thought himself beyond delight. "You will write to King's Landing," he said to Catelyn in a low voice, as if the new fact were the grease on the hinge of an old door. "And you will build the letter on truth. My life weighs more to them tonight than it did yesterday." "I will write," Catelyn said, "and I will send men I trust to carry it. And I will copy the letter twice and send 2 parties by 2 roads. And I will not sleep while they are away." "Sleep," he said, "while the world folds and refolds its little bits of malice like a washerwoman at her board." "Sleep, Lady Stark. Wake rested. You will need your strength for my sister." He was trying to wound her. He could not stop trying. It was his way of knowing the depth of a well. She let it wash and returned to him. "I have measured queens," she said. "They are flesh." He smiled again a little. "All flesh. Even kings." Mendem Shao. By morning, word of the attempt had climbed the castle as the sun did, and then gone out on riders like sparks flicked from a hammer. Great John Umber stomped into the hall, swearing his own beard to war. He demanded that he be given leave to hunt down the scum behind the attempt and nail their skins to the door of the nearest sept. Edmure wrung his hands and made a noise about the sanctity of his doors. The Blackfish nodded to both men and assigned riders to both idea and sarcasm. Rickard Karstark said nothing, and his silence had the strangest sound of all. At noon, 2 envoys left Riverrun, one carrying the letter that was as clean as Catelyn and Maester Vyman could make it, the other carrying its twin. They took different gates, different roads, different prayers. Each had 6 men sworn to him and a singer whose hands had been searched for knives. Catelyn watched them go and stood long enough on the wall that the sun wrote a bright ache across her eyes. In King's Landing, men were already moving pieces on the other boards. Cersei took Catelyn's letter and turned it in her hands, as if she were feeling for a hidden edge. She smiled. Cersei's smiles always had the form of something else, and spoke it aloud to Tyrion, pacing the floor like a cat that had learned to wear pearls. "She dangles my brother like meat over a dog," she said. "She offers a trade as if I ought to thank her for not keeping him for a necklace." Tyrion took the letter with both hands, as if one of them might otherwise slip, and give the paper a chance to burn him. He read quickly, and then again, slower, the way a man drinks the second cup of wine because he cannot decide whether the first helped or harmed. "She offers fairness," he said. "Yes, much as we ever get. Fairness." Cersei said, and the word had to bend awkwardly to fit her mouth. "Do you recall the song about the maid who sold fairness by the yard in the market? They cut out her tongue for false weights." "Only after buying several bolts," Tyrion said dryly. Father will scold." Cersei said, "Father will say that if we admit there is anything to trade, we confess guilt. He will talk of precedent and of lions and of wolves who die because they forget they are not lions. Then he will open a purse." "Or a box," Tyrion said. "He will open something." No one consulted Joffrey, though he posed in the mirror with a crown and imagined he was consulted. And Sansa stood very still when she heard that Sir Jaime lived and was not being used for anything bloody today. She did not cry. There is a way a girl cannot cry that makes a room colder. When she looked down at her hands, they looked neat and ordinary. She wondered, uncharitably, whether Arya's hands were dirty wherever they were. Then she hated herself for the thought, and kept hating herself, until it felt like a little quilt she could pull up to her chin to keep from shaking. Tywin Lannister, riding. Read the letter beneath an oak whose leaves poured sunlight over his paper like gold coins spilled from a miser's hand. He read it once. He read it again. He folded it into a square that would fit into nothing useful and gave it back to the messenger. "We will arrange a meeting," he said. "Some place with good sightlines and poor cover. Some place whose name will be easy to remember when the singers want to put words to it later." "Shall I?" the messenger began, the way men begin when the lion opens his mouth in the old stories. "You shall write," Tywin said, "and you shall make them think the writing was your idea. And you shall let my daughter think it was hers. And you shall thank the gods that the wars of clerks do not scar your hands. Then you shall die in your bed with ink under your nails. Go!" In River Run, Catelyn watched the river and thought of beds. When Robb came to her with a soft defiance in his eyes, and the name Jean Westerling smuggled into his mouth like a boy sneaking sweets into a sept, she did not scold. She laid her hand on his cheek and felt the newness of his beard under her palm, and the boy who had never needed to shave, and she said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "Tell me you will not let your mistake hunt you." "Hunt it first." "I broke faith," he said, as if saying it in her presence might unmake it, or make it a thing that could live under a roof. "You broke a bargain with a man whose faith is a counting house and a pride," she said. "Walder Frey can be bought, but the coin is not only gold. We will find the coin and pay it." "If he refuses the coin?" Robb asked. "Then he refuses the realm," Catelyn said, and the keys on her belt made a single sound, small and sure. "And he will learn whether the river can swallow a bridge." Walder Frey had already begun to write his refusal. Not to the coin, not to the realm, but to the idea that he was not worth the time of a king. Men like Walder Frey spent their whole lives filing keys for doors no one else wanted to walk through. He would be courted. He would taste it like honey from a comb he had always owned, but never been allowed to bite. Bolton would see that honey and tilt his head, calculating the droplet as it ran, the way a leech calculates its own weight when it drinks. But in the days between, River Run breathed. The wheat carts came in from the east with dust thrown up by happy horses. The fishers brought pike and perch and river eels that made a man's mouth shine with oil. The men sang in the yard to convince themselves that singing still existed. Girls laughed at those men because they were boys. Women mended. Catelyn walked the walls and the halls and the long narrow board of her own soul, and she found that the places where she had thought only to suffer had begun to hold. She did not mistake this for victory. She took it for scaffolding. On the 7th day, the first raven returned from King's Landing with a hand as fine as lace upon its letter. The seals were right. The oaths were the sort that cracked like ice when a man broke them. A meet would be held in a field 3 miles north of the Crown's honormen's outmost line, near an old oak where men had hanged horse thieves in the war before last, and then sung about it. Each side would bring 10 men-at-arms and 1 singer to record the treaty. Each side would bring a maester. Each side would swear on 7 gods and the river. Robb laughed aloud when he read the phrase, "and the river," as if Tyrion had meant him to. The Blackfish said, "We will bring 20 men-at-arms who can count to 10. Edmure said, "A singer," and looked very earnestly at his chest of instruments as if he owned one. Catelyn said only, "Brienne rides with me." Brienne looked up from the whetstone she was drawing down her blade. The stone sang. The blade listened. "If this goes ill," Catelyn said later, when the torches were low and the river had resumed talking only to itself. "If it is trap and treachery, it will be," Brienne said. "But not only." "If it is," Catelyn said, "I need you to bring me back to River Run, alive or dead. I need you to bring me back here. This is the place my father built. This is the place where my children find me when I am not in their sight. If I die in a field between the claws of the capital and the teeth of the north, I will be nowhere." "I will bring you back," Brienne said. "Alive. Alive." Catelyn repeated, and it felt like a word she could wear. I would see the river again. In the cell, Jaime lay on his back and stared at the ceiling stones, as if they were a story written in a language he had known in childhood and then forgotten. He did not sleep. When he closed his eyes, he saw a woman in blue and white move, the way a man's pride moves when it grows tired of thinking itself the strongest thing in the room. He saw a girl with her mother's hands hold back a tide. He saw a boy king with a crown too heavy for his neck, and his sister bending under it as if it were her own choice. He saw a tower window and a fall. He saw the thing that had made him, and the thing that might unmake him, and wondered if they were the same. When dawn came, the river threw light against the ceiling again. And for an instant, those lights looked like little banners marching in formation. He closed his eyes. He had known so many banners. He wondered which one would cover him in the end, and whether he would recognize the smell of the cloth when it did. The field where they were to meet had a name that had been lost and replaced a century ago with another name that had been forgotten by everyone, except the ghosts who did not answer when men asked their questions. The oak was not old by the measures of oaks men sing about, but it was old enough to have opinions. Its branches were notched with the memory of rope. When the riders came, Lannister red like a tongue of fire, Tully blue and red like a river that has learned to carry a battlefield on its back. The tree made no show of being pleased. Tyrion was there, with a maester who was old enough to be a proper liar and a singer whose hands had been searched. Ser Balon Swan rode among the 10 chosen for the crown. Beside him trotted a knight whose armor was as much for the look of things as for the stopping of any arrow that might care to ask a question. Cersei had not come. That was expected. Tywin had not come. It was wise. Catelyn came with Brienne at her side, the Blackfish not far behind, and men who knew the names of the things they feared and said them under their breath to make them smaller. The maester they had brought was Vyman, who had once set a child's broken wrist with a gentleness that passed for magic in a world that preferred swords. Robb did not ride with them. He had chosen to be a king elsewhere that day, and let his mother be what she was, a different kind of blade. Tyrion bowed from the saddle. Lady Stark, he said, I hope the river remembered your name when you crossed it. It remembers all our names, Catelyn said. Some it keeps longer. The formalities took an hour. They always did. Men loved to hear themselves swear. The singers tuned, and the maesters coughed, and the sun played at soldier with the shadows of leaves on the men's shoulders. Catelyn kept her hands folded on her pommel, and did not let her eyes slip from the faces that might lie. Tyrion's face was in its usual condition, which was to say it was truthful and false in equal measures and amused by its own capacity for both. You ask Sansa Stark for Jaime Lannister, he said. When they had reached the stone in the stream where all such talk runs thin and shows its shape. A fair bargain. And Arya, Catelyn said. His face moved. He had not come to lie about this. The best liars prepare their lies like food. They do not serve what they have not cooked. Arya Stark, he said quietly, and in the saying of her name there was so much not said that the river paused and leaned its head. Lady Stark, if I could give you Arya, I would. If I could find her, I would put her in your arms if only to watch your eyes when you realized I'd done something not useful to me. You can give me Sansa, Catelyn said. That is a beginning. It is, he said. And yet. Your king will make you say yet, she said. Your sister will make you say yet. The man who is your father will sit in a tent and watch your mouth and say nothing until he says everything afterward. He smiled without pleasure. It saves him the trouble of watching other men's mouths. She is a child, Catelyn said. Sansa is a child. And a hostage, Tyrion said, on the same breath, as if the two words formed a single beast. In a world that loves children as items of account. Will you count her? Catelyn asked. Yes, he said, but I will count her more carefully than most. When they parted, there was no bargain, only the outline of one. That is often the best a meeting can do. Tyrion agreed to write, and to speak, and to badger, and to put the letter in Cersei's hand, and then in Tywin's. Catelyn agreed to keep Jaime safe within the castle that had defied Sellswords and knives, and the ordinary rot that often finds its way into stone. They agreed to meet again. They agreed to call the next agreement a treaty, if it would make the singers braver. That night, under River Run's walls, the fishers lit lamps against the gnats, and the gnats came anyway, and died in golden halos. Sir Desmond told the boys in the dungeon that if they kept dozing on the midnight watch, he would put eels in their boots. Brienne dozed, when ordered, in a chair outside the cell, because there is an obedience that does not undignify a knight. Catelyn sat with the windows open to the river and held in her mind the map of a land that had become her soul. A weirwood's white face, a city that ate children, a field with an oak that remembered rope, a bridge that would be asked to carry more than its stones. She wondered, as the day turned, what would have lived and died if she had given in to the impulse that had followed her like a hound for weeks and months. Open the door, unbind the man, send him with one true sword and one good-hearted maid to buy her daughter's safety with his feet and his name, and trust to gods and luck and the old stubbornness of rivers. She had not done it. The choice had hardened around her and become the shape of her days. She did not know whether it would break her or bear her. Somewhere beyond her, in a camp where the tents were neat enough to suggest that victory would be asked for politely, and then taken with knives, Roose Bolton listened to the news that Jaime Lannister remained caged and did not flinch. He listened to the news that Robb Stark had married a girl for her tears. He listened to the news that Walder Frey felt insulted and hungry, which were his two modes of being. He set the news upon a board the way a leech sets itself upon a man, delicately and with an old smile. He did not think about love. He did not think about right. He thought about the color of blood drying on pale winter grass, and whether it could be made to look less like guilt if there were enough banners around it. The river moved. Men slept. Jaime Lannister did not. When Brienne woke in the last hour before dawn and checked the lock with her hand, she found it as she had left it, true. She put her palm against the iron and felt the night's cold creeping in, as if stone could tell her secrets if she were gentle enough. The day would bring ravens, and the day after that, men with mouths full of everything but what they meant. The castle would hold or it would not. A choice made and not unmade has a way of making a road even men who despise it must walk. Catelyn went to the battlements as the first light sorted itself from the dark. Mist lay along the river like cloth someone had forgotten to fold. Far out in that cloth, a fish rose and took what it needed from the skin of the world and left no ripple she could see. In her chest, something answered, not hope, not despair, but the river's own patience, older than choice, older than keys. She watched the water take the light and learn again to be a mirror and a blade. Behind her, footsteps approached. Familiar, loved, too heavy with what they would have to say. She did not turn. She let the river teach her another breath, and another. Then she reached for the keys on her belt and felt their weight, and the teeth of them against her palm, and knew that whatever door they opened next, she would walk through and find herself still where she had chosen to be. A key. The footsteps belonged to her brother. Edmure's tread always had a hurry in it, as if the world might go off without him if he did not catch it by the sleeve. He came to stand beside her, cheeks wind-bitten, auburn hair damp at the temples, and combed the wrong way by his own fingers. A habit from boyhood. You found the morning first, he said, pitching his voice to match the hush of the river. You always did. It finds me, she answered. What brings you? A rider out of the neck, he said, and the words touched cold places inside her before they were done being said. A Cranagman who says Theon Greyjoy has taken Winterfell. The wall might have moved under her feet. The river did not pause. It had learned long ago to carry news like this without tipping. She had not realized she had taken a breath until she heard it come back to her, as if the air itself needed to steady. Taken, she repeated, and the word felt like a rung that led down. How? By trickery and speed, Edmure said grimly. He came with few men, but the gates were open to him. He bluffed. He lied, and then he made the lie true. The Cranagman says he rides the walls like a lord and wears our father's hall as a new skin. He says ravens have flown north and south, and some never came. Dow. She closed her eyes. For a heartbeat she was in Winterfell. The smell of hot water and smoke, the taste of brown bread, the sound of Bran laughing when he should have been sleeping. She saw Robb as a child, the little lordling with a wooden sword he would not put down, and Ned's hand on his hair, brief and dear. The memory held a knife and knew how to turn it. "Bran," she said. "Rickon." Edmure swallowed. The Crannogman did not see them. He heard that boys were in the castle, but not their names. Theon raised their direwolf banners, and a kraken above. Her hands had found the stone of the battlement without her telling them to. It was cold and wet, like a river stone pulled up from a depth where light is a rumor. She kept her voice level. "Have we a raven from Maester Luwin?" "None," Edmure said. "Then we do not know yet what has been done," she said. And the steadiness in her voice felt like a lie she could forgive herself for telling. "Send riders to the mountain clans, to the Umbers in Last Hearth, to the Manderless in White Harbor. Send to Deepwood Motte. The Greyjoys count their numbers in sails and salt. The land remains." "They will have sent already," Edmure said. "Still, we send." He dragged a hand through his hair again, the wrong way, making it stand like a field after a storm. Robb will not fly," she said more sharply than she had meant. The sharpness made Edmure blink. "He cannot be everywhere Mother wishes at once. He will do what a king can." "Ben?" Edmure looked at her, as if he had come to tell her something, and had been told something himself instead. He nodded, once. "There is more," he said, "because there is always more. A sellsword band on the far bank. The same stink that came to sniff our cellars the other night. They do not like that we keep the Golden Lion under our floor. They will try again." "They will," Catelyn said. "Let them. Stone learns men, as men learn stone." When he had gone, she kept her hands on the parapet until the stone had remembered them. Then she turned and went down to the hall. The day had sharpened by then. The sounds had edges. The riders clattered out of the east gate with their pennons snapping, and were swallowed by the mist as if the castle had dreamed them. In the yard, Sir Desmond cursed the boys softly without malice, and set them to running until fear shook out of their legs and left only the rhythm. The kitchens worked as if war were only extra mouths, not a god that required its offerings dressed. She went to the cells because there was nothing else that would hold the weight correctly. Brienne had her coif off, and a cloth pressed against the dark swell at her hairline. She looked up as Catelyn came and stood. The chair grated slightly as she pushed it back. The two boys at the door looked as boys always look in the morning when they have learned something, and do not know whether to be proud of having learned it. "Put the chair back," Catelyn said gently. "You're taller than stubbornness but not bigger." Brienne obeyed with that same implacable grace. Jaime watched, not concealed in his watching. It pleased him to be caught at it. He tilted his head like a bird assessing a coin. "You look as if the river told you a secret, and it was not kind," he said. "The river does not tell secrets," she said. "It carries them." "Then it carries one with Theon Greyjoy on it," he said, and when she did not cough up surprise, he shrugged. "The guards speak. It is their nature. And news like that is a dog loose in the yard." "My home," she said, and the words seemed too small to carry the thing. "My sons. Theon grew up in Winterfell. He ate at my table." "And you mistake shared salt for loyalty?" he asked softly. "You Starks always mistake your own decency for the world's." "My husband was decent," she said. "The world cut his head off." "Yes," Jaime said with a smile too thin to be mistaken for anything but what it was. "And there the world and I were briefly in harmony." Brienne's hand tightened on the cloth in a way that made it twist. Catelyn felt the ache of having no good weapon for this talk, but the one she had always used, not striking. She let her breath move once, twice. "Does the news help you?" she asked abruptly. "Does it make you taller in your own eyes, that the North bleeds?" "It makes me nothing," he said. And for a moment, something fell away from his face. "Nothing makes me anything in here. That is the point of a cell." She could not help herself. She asked, "And out of a cell, what makes you then?" He considered that as if he had been given a riddle he had not expected to enjoy. In the world, he said, skill, birth, show, beauty, courage, wayne, cruelty, good boots, a sister, a father, a sword with a name, the sort of lies men want to love. Choose 3. The rest will be used against you. Nempo. And for you? Brienne asked, roughened by the cloth she had just set aside. For me, he said, turning his eyes on her and letting them be honest for once. It was a sword, a father and a sister. When the sword was taken, I still had the others. It is only now I begin to wonder what I had and what had me. Catelyn heard in his voice the ghost of another story, the one she had not let happen, the road with the maid beside him and the rope and the running. It would have been a different conversation in a different room. The gods love their rooms. Lady Stark, Sir Desmond said from the door, breathless and formal at once. Lord Karstark asks for you in the small sept. She looked at Brienne, who understood without words and turned back to the bars. Jaime had the grace not to smirk. The small sept had been her mother's place. The candles seemed to burn lower here, even when newly lit. 7 faces looked down from their niches, stern, loving, indifferent, pitying, amused, asleep, awake. Rickard Karstark stood under the mother, as if daring her to be enough. 2 of his men flanked him. Their hands did not touch their sword hilts, but they were thinking of doing it so hard she could hear it. My lady, Karstark said, and his voice had been honed on his son's names. I require justice. Justice is not a mug that can be filled on demand. She said. Say what thing you would have measured. The Lannister whelps you keep, he said evenly. They are kin to the Kingslayer. They were a lion in their bones. They sleep while my sons do not. That cannot be allowed to continue. You came yesterday and made this speech a different way, she said. I told you then that we would not stain our oaths to soothe your grief. I tell you now again, no hostages will be murdered in River Run. Murdered, he said, tasting it. My sons were murdered under flags, and you would ask me to bow to the word, because a Septon likes how it sounds in his prayers. I ask you to bow to it because your king will be no king without it. She said, because the North lives or dies on such weathers. Then my king is a boy, and the North will die. He drew himself up until he looked taller than the mother's image behind him, and twice as implacable. Do not judge me when you have lost nothing you can touch. Come to me when your boys have bled into a river. We will talk then of oaths, in the soft voice you prefer. Something inside her that had sat and borne things tried to rise. She forced it back down. She could not afford the violence it would do to her fairness. I have lost my husband. She said so quietly that he had to lean forward to hear. My father is dying. My daughters are held by enemies who make games of children. This morning I have heard that a boy I raised as one of my own has taken my home and hung a kraken over it. Do not teach me the price of loss, Lord Karstark. I keep a ledger you could not lift. He stared. His mouth opened and he closed it. And when he spoke again, some of the iron had gone. In its place there was something worse. The certainty of a man who has decided that his own ruin is the last coin he can spend and intends to spend it with ceremony. Then we are done, he said. Go guard your lion. I will find my own justice. Rickard, she said, surprising herself with the name. Do not make a hole you cannot climb out of. He bowed without bending. I have been in a hole since the Whispering Wood. This is only a deeper one. He turned, and his men turned with him, and the door of the sept closed on his back like a line drawn slowly with a knife. She went looking for Robb and found only a square of raw-sewn canvas and a scent of wet horse. He had ridden out again with a light company to look to some foragers too near the lines for comfort. The Blackfish had stayed, perhaps on purpose. When she told him what Karstark had said, he listened with his head tilted as if the words were rain he needed to know the thickness of. He will go to the squires, he said. He will cut the thin branch because he cannot reach the thick one. He will do it at night, and with men who owe him their supper, and will not say no. Then we must spread the girls thin, he said dryly, meaning the guards. We must put a man in every shadow, and then put a shadow inside that man. And we must know that sometimes men do the thing you watched for, and sometimes they do the thing you could not have imagined, because it did not fit inside your own skull. Brienne, Catelyn said. The big maid cannot be everywhere, he said. But she can be where it will matter most. I will send her to the tower where the whelps sleep. Do not call them that, she said, more from a need to keep the world in order than because the word mattered. Names are always the first thing to go to rot, he said, but he nodded and went. Night came as if the day had given up arguing. Brienne climbed the tower stairs with her mail whispering and her breath steady, a torch in her left hand and her sword in her right. Two Tully men stood at the door to the boys' chamber and looked vastly relieved when she arrived, the way men always look when something honest and large comes to stand with them against a world that is better at lying. Inside, Willem Lannister, gold hair like a pale candle, slept curled on his side with his hand under his cheek, as if he were still 11. Tion Frey snored, the uncertain half-choked snore of a youth putting on the bulk he means to carry for the rest of his life. Brienne sat on a stool, set the torch in the iron bracket, and listened. A castle is never silent. Water, wind, men, rats, the shifting of a beam as it settles into the day's weather. She could hear all of it, and she could hear the other thing, absence where sound should be. She rose without thinking and moved to the window slit. The yard below was dark in the way of yards when the torches are poorly placed. She could not see the stair. She could feel it. The door opened softly, and a man came through without looking at the guards because the guards were already dead. Brienne had her sword in motion before the torchlight found his face. The second man tried to follow, and the blade skated off her pauldron and bit the doorpost, sparks kissing wood. The third went for the bed. She caught him with her offhand and threw him into Willem's dreams. The boy woke at the sound with a flinch that would have been comical if it had not been a measure of how men become what they must. Tion was up too, blinking, then seeing, then not understanding, then understanding exactly, and too late. Brienne fought. There is no other useful word. The space was wrong. Everything was too close. The bedpost caught her elbow. The second man found a way past her guard that would have been clever if the room had been larger, and she turned what would have been a gutting into a cut that sang along the rings of her mail and left a hot line and nothing more. The first man went down with his hand still reaching for Tion's throat, fingers opening and closing, as if they could not accept what had happened to the wrist they were attached to. The third man, the one she had thrown, got his feet under him and reached for his knife with a croak. It was quick, but not quicker than her. After, there was blood on the floor, and two boys pressed back against the stone with their eyes too wide. Brienne stood with her breath loud and counted the bodies with the contempt one reserves for arithmetic that should not have been asked for. She knelt by one of the guards outside. He was very young. His hair still remembered a mother's comb. She closed his eyes and said a word that she had learned as a girl and had not expected to say, and then she went down the stairs in 3 strides at a time and made the tower loud. Catelyn came, of course. There's a way she had of arriving at the place where her body was needed that Jaime had learned to hear in the stone, and he heard it now in the corridor before the tower, in the yard's new echoes. She took in the dead boys, her boys, and the living boys, other people's, and the men who had thought they could break the night. "Bring Lord Karstark to me," she said. He came at noon, and there was no pretense left in him. He did not deny. He did not plead. He stood with his hands open, and his face blank of everything except the kind of pride that men mistake for steel when it is only ice. "They wore the lion," he said. "I have done what a father must. You have done what a murderer does when he cannot reach the man he hates," Robb said, and his voice was his father's without the age. He had come in on a lathered horse and had not bothered to wipe his face. He looked young and terrible, the way a spring flood looks when it finds a town that should not have been built where it was. "You killed boys under my protection. You have made a hole in my honor and tried to put your grief into it. Karstark's mouth twitched. You will do as your father did, he said, as if making a blessing cruel. You will swing the sword yourself, because you are from a house that likes to believe it is different. Robb said nothing for a time long enough that the hall learned the shape of the silence. Then he nodded once, the way men nod to the gods when they mean to argue after, and he said, It must be done. Bring him to the godswood. Catelyn did not argue. She would have once. She did not this time. She watched with a kind of hollow seeing as Robb took the sword someone offered him. Not ice, no. Ice was in the capital being turned into a thing that would pretend to be two honorable blades and succeed only in being two expensive lies. And he set his feet and did what needed to be done. Karstark knelt and said something under his breath that may have been one of his son's names, or both or neither. The word is not the point at that moment. The point is the fall. After, Robb stood with blood on his cheeks and turned to the men who had followed Karstark to this place for this end. You have a choice, he said. You may swear to me again and mean it, and you may ride where I ride, and stay where I stay, and kill where I tell you and spare when I tell you. Or you may go home. Home? Said a man in the back with a laugh that made itself ugly. Home, where the Ironborn take our smokehouses, and the Boltons take our sons for flaying practice. What home, your grace? Carhold is a word with blood on it. Then make a new word, Robb said. Swear, or go. Some swore. Some went. A piece of the north peeled away like bark burned from a tree, and the tree remained standing because trees always pretend disbelief until the wind persuades them. Robb went to wash his face and did not keep the tears from his eyes when he thought he was alone. He did not hide either when he came to his mother. I have done a thing that will cost me, he said, and put his hands on the table as if he would hold it to keep the room from listing. But I could not let him break open our honor and sort through it with those filthy hands. You did what you had to, she said, and that was a worse comfort than most. He flinched as if she had used the wrong pet name on an old dog, and been reminded she could not change the name. Now I need the phrase, he said. I need them twice. I need them for men, and I need them for bridges. A king who kills a lord and then begs a river lord to forgive him. The songs will choke on it, and then make a tune anyway. Then we will give Lord Walder a feast of apology. She said, we will make it fine and long and insistent. We will make him fat with the sound of it. He will complain, and then he will eat. He looked at her, and there was gratitude there, and something like relief and something like dread. You will come with me, he said. I will need you to watch my words. Uncle Edmure will need you to watch his face. I will come, she said, although the thought of leaving the river made her feel as if someone had reached into her chest and taken hold of something that wanted to stay. Brienne stays. Brienne stays, he agreed. With the Kingslayer. With Uncle Brynden. We will leave what steel we can afford behind. Memishan. Before they could ride to the twins, the world sent them another blow to learn the shape of. A raven came black with the smoke of another city in its feathers. It told them that the Blackwater ran green fire, and the sea burned, and Stannis Baratheon's ships were torches, and that the city was saved, if a city that eats itself can be said to be saved. It told them that Tywin Lannister had ridden in with a garden's worth of roses at his back, and that the boy king wore the same head when he went to bed as the one he had worn that afternoon. The letter included a phrase Catelyn would not have expected to see in ink and seal: our alliance with Highgarden. She could feel the taste of it on Tywin's teeth. She let the paper fall and watched it curl. Tyrion? She asked, because the dwarf had been the only moving thing in the capital that looked like reason even when it was being unreasonable. The raven says he took a wound to the face, the blackfish said. He lives. He may wish sometimes he did not, but he lives. His father will put him away in a soft drawer and tell him to be quiet when the guests come. The queen will put perfume on the smell of it and go on. Then Sansa remains. She said. Remains, he said, and the word felt like it was carved in ice. News of Winterfell came again on top of that news. Worse and worse, as news knows how to be. This time, there were names in it, and a story men could make the mistake of believing. 2 boys had been killed and burned and hung in iron cages. The ashes had fallen. Theon Greyjoy had wept, the letter said, and then laughed. The letter did not say what shape Catelyn's breath took when she read it, or how her throat learned to be a fist and then unlearned it with superstition, in case keeping that shape would keep the world from cracking. She could not cry at first. The river would have caught her tears and made them seem smaller than they were. Robb broke then. He did not break where songs like to put the shatter, but he broke. He went to his knees in her solar with the door closed, and she went to her knees with him, and they stayed like that a long time, saying nothing because they did not have the kind of silence between them that had to be filled. After, he rose and put on his cloak, and went out and looked at the map as if he meant to chew it. "We must go to the twins," he said. "We must not be late. We must not be proud. We must bring what sweet words Walder Frey eats and feed him until he cannot pretend to be hungry. We must make him believe he is the bridge and we are only the men who use it. Menderos. Jane." She said, and he flinched as if she had thrown the name. "She cannot come." "I know," he said. "She is a wound I cannot show him. She will stay at River Run under your care. She will stay." She said, and tried not to feel pity. The girl had been kind and earnest and very young. Pity is a hound that returns to a house that has no meat. She would feed it anyway. That night, before they rode, Catelyn went one last time to Jaime. It was a long habit now. She did it the way a woman tastes the bread when it comes from the oven to know if the day will be nourished. "Your Stannis failed," he said without triumph. "My father planted a garden and made men eat what grew there. King's grave," she said. "And let the word be its own irony." He cocked his head. "You have a cutting wit when you are not striking," he said. Then, as if tired of the game before it ran itself to ashes, he took a breath and said, "Do you know why I killed Aerys?" Brienne shifted by the door, a change in weight only. Catelyn was startled into honesty. "For your father," she said. "For your pride. Because you could." "No," he said, and the word startled him a little as if it had jumped from his mouth too quickly. "Because he meant to burn the city. He had pyromancers hide pots in the cellars and under the sept and at the base of the city walls. He meant to light it before he let what he thought were his enemies have it. He meant to roast 100,000. He told me to bring him my father's head, and then he told me to bring him wildfire. So I brought him his own throat instead. The air in the cell seemed to change. Even the torch noted it. Catelyn felt for a moment the press of something that is not forgiveness, and not hate, but the cold surprise of discovering that an enemy is not a single shape. It is a cruelty to build a man out of one line. He was giving her another. "If that is true," she said slowly, "then you saved the city." "If that is true," he said, "then I am damned twice. Once for breaking my oath to the king, and once for breaking my oath to the oath. No one likes a story where the right thing stinks." Brienne's eyes were on him with a complexity that looked painful to carry. Catelyn did not know what to do with the information except add it to the weight of all the other things she did not know what to do with. She set it there, where she set the keys sometimes to rest her hand. "We ride to the twins," she said. "There will be men who smile with their mouths and keep the rest of their faces still. There will be bread and salt." "Salt," he said softly. "The Starks and their salt. If I return," she said, and Brienne moved at that. A small, involuntary flinch. "If, then I will speak to you again about the king you slew. If I do not, then you may tell the story to stone. It listens." "Damn? And sure." "Ride carefully," he said, and then made a face as if he had said a thing he had not meant to. "Bows love bridges. Walder Frey loves himself," she said. "It is the same thing, Maedol." In the yard, Edmure fretted himself into competence. He would stay. He would hold River Run with the Blackfish and Brienne, and a double ring of guards around the cell that men seemed determined to believe was a door. The Tully men tightened girths and muttered the practical prayers soldiers always mutter. "Let the leather hold. Let the hoof find ground. Let the arrow fly wide if it must. Let it fly true if it must. Let the friends die easy and the enemies hard." Robb looked at his men the way a boy looks at a dog he loves before a hunt. Love cannot keep an arrow from finding ribs. It can make the arrow feel worse about it afterward. They rode at dawn. The river was low for spring. The stones showed their slick backs. Her father would have read a meaning in it. The sky kept its thoughts. They took the road that is always described as familiar in Psalms and never in truth is. A road changes every time a man rides it because he is not the man he was. They slept under willows and in crofters' barns, where the straw smelled of mice and last summer. They ate bread that tasted like the oath that had been made for it. They passed men who had learned to count the harvest of bodies in their hedgerows and make it a math that left room for living. In the evenings, Robb and his lord spoke in low voices. The word Frey lay between them like a river. Some of his men hated the name. Some of them made jokes. Humor is the coward of fear and also its brother. Catelyn tended the fire and watched her son's hands. A man's hands tell truer than his mouth. Robb's hands were restless and careful. He touched the map and then did not. He touched his sword and then did not. At times he touched nothing, as if the thing he wanted was not wood or iron or hide. On the third day, a raven found them as they watered the horses at a ford that had forgotten its own name. It came from the east, tired and angry at being a bird that men use like a string between their teeth. It bore the Lannister seal and the hand that had written to the river before. Tyrion's letter was neat and unsentimental. He could not deliver Arya. He could, perhaps, arrange Sansa's exchange if certain things were agreed to. The time, the place, the guarantees, the manner of the Kingslayer's keeping until the moment of exchange. The words had the careful balance of a man writing while his father's shadow lay across the parchment like a threat. "It is not a no," Robb said. "It is not a yes," Catelyn said. "It is the sound men make when they are building a yes out of no, because the no will not serve, and the yes offends them," the Blackfish observed. "We will conserve our answer until we have crossed the Frey's threshold." Robb laughed once, low. "Crossed," he said. "We think in bridges now. The gods have a sense of humor." They saw the twins in the afternoon of the sixth day, rising out of the river's flat like two teeth in a wide mouth. They had not changed. Still severe, still practical, still smug. Walder Frey's banners hung limp in a wind that had gone to pester another place. The bridge itself looked more narrow than she remembered, and the water under it looked more patient. Patience can be a kindness, and it can be a cruelty, and it can be a trap. Robb sent heralds with trumpets and polite words that had been combed 3 times by a mother. They waited in the churned earth between tower and shore. Horses shifting hips, men adjusting straps they had adjusted already. Catelyn watched the arrow slits in the towers as if eyes lived in them. She thought of bread and salt, and the laws men make when they are trying to believe their gods care about their dinners. A boy came to the battlements and shouted down insult disguised as courtesy. They could come in. They could leave their arms. They could be inspected for treachery. They could be kissed by Walder Frey's concern. Robb answered with the words he had chosen. They were careful. Care has a way of tasting like weakness to men who have not had to bother with it, and like strength to men who have bled for its absence. The drawbridge whined and lowered, and then stopped, as if remembering it had the right to choose the pace of its own surrender. They crossed into the shadow of the tower. The air was cooler there, as if the river had been brought inside to sit at table. Men in Frey, blue and gray, stood in their neat rows pretending to be a family. Walder's sons and grandsons and bastards wore faces that had learned their lessons from the old man. Always look as if the other man is the one who owes you. When Walder himself came to greet them, Born like a bad-tempered idol in a chair that made his bones think of splinters, he smiled widely enough to show the gaps where the teeth had been. "King in the North," he said, and made the title a jest and a jewel at once. "You have found my poor house in your wanderings. You have brought me a mother I was not promised and no daughter I was. What am I to do with men who forget their vows?" "Beg your pardon and give it the respect it deserves," Robb said, and surprise flicked through Walder's watery eyes, quick as a minnow. He had expected bluster or shame. He had expected an easy sport. He had not expected a boy who could make surrender sound like strength. Walder cackled. "Oh, I will be begged," he said. "Begged and fed and told that I am the bridge over which all great things must pass. I will be sung to. You bring me a singer." "We do," Catelyn said. "And a maester to write your name properly in the account where all our houses will need to read it." "Properly," Walder said, making the word into something with a bad aftertaste. "Bring them in then. Feed them. I will be gracious. I am always gracious when the plates are full." Medicem. They went in, and the stink of the twins wrapped them. River damp and men, and too many meals eaten in too few rooms. The tables had been polished recently, as if someone had tried to make wood shine by force of will. The hall was long and low. The candles were many and still not quite enough. Music stumbled and then found its feet and began to pretend. Catelyn watched everything. It is the only thing a woman without a sword can do that is worth anything in a place like that. The servants' faces, the way the wine was poured, who was allowed to stand where, whose eye did not meet whose eye when it should have. She saw Rosalind Frey stealing glances at her own hands, as if wondering whether they would betray her by shaking. And she saw Black Walder let his mouth go flat when he thought no one was looking. And she saw Ryman Frey, bloated, red, sponge his lips in a manner that suggested he was thinking of being a big man later for once. There were bargains to be made, and they were made as men make them. With words they mean half and words they mean double and hands shaken, when one hand has grease on it, and the other pretends not to notice. Walder demanded apologies and got them. He demanded marriages and got one. Edmure, stricken and valiant, nodded at the thought of Rosalind and made himself a man who could belong to a household that would eat him if he let it. There were details. There are always details. The bread came. The salt came. Walder made a show of it grander than a seps. He liked to play priest when there were no gods close enough to contradict him. That night, in a chamber given to her that had a whet in the stone like a cough, Catelyn sat with her hands around a cup of small beer and listened to the tower shift. She had a bad feeling and refused it. Not because bad feelings are not useful. They are, but because this one had the shape of a thing that could not be helped by having a feeling about it. She thought of the river. She thought of River Run. She thought of Brienne's watchful shoulders and Jaime's confession like a stone dropped into a bucket. Brienne had the dream of a ladder that would not stop climbing. She woke with her heart thudding and the taste of iron in her mouth. And it took her a moment to put herself back inside the chair and the corridor and the lock. She checked it again. She did not smile at herself for the habit. She had learned to trust the things that other people mocked in her. The guards dozed in their careful shifts. The Blackfish crossed, his step like a cat who has decided to allow men to believe cats are clumsy. "Are you bored, sir?" Jaime asked, as if the question had the right to be asked. "I have work to do," she said. "So do I," he said. "I am practicing being patient. I mean to be very good at it by the time I am 50. You will not live to 50 if you speak to men with knives as you do," she said. "I do not," he said. "I speak to men with knives like a man who remembers his own. I speak to you like a man who is curious. What about? About what kind of story the gods are telling with you?" he said, surprising himself again. "About whether you were born to be mocked and turned out to be the mocker, or whether you were born to be noble and turned out to be an honest peasant with a big back and a better heart. About which of those is nobler?" "I do not care," she said. "I know," he said, and smiled in the half-dark. "That is why it matters." In the morning at the Twins, songs came down the stairs before men did. It is a bad sign when that happens. Men should go first. Edmure bored better than Catelyn feared. Rosalind looked at him like a girl looks at a man when she has decided he will not hurt her if she is careful. Walder made jokes that had hooks in them. Robb wore his crown the way a boy wears a father's hat, with a courage that deserves a better world than the one it gets. If there was doom in the room, it did not yet speak with a voice that could be pointed to. It breathed in the joints of the table, and in the flour on the bread, and in the fissures in the old stone, where damp made a home. It waited with the patience of a river. Catelyn could feel it because she had learned to feel the thing, under the thing. The men who laughed loudest could not. She smiled and made talk, and counted knives and doors, and knew that none of it would be enough if the gods had decided to teach them about hospitality and its true uses. They sang of victories. Men always do. They like to pretend they are reminding the world of its obligations. The more clever of Walder's brood sang of the river and bridges and crossings, as if they were clever. The wine was good, and then too good. Robb leaned to his mother once and said something about the color of the banners above the high table. How they made the light redder, and she put her hand on his arm and nodded as if banners were the thing to attend to. That night, when the hall had emptied and the servants scraped, she took herself to a narrow window and watched the river move. It helped. She would have liked to sleep and dream of nothing. The world does not often permit mothers to choose their dreams. Back in River Run, the day they reached the twins, a letter found Brienne. It came by a boy with straw in his hair and a cut on his thumb from trying to play squire with a real sword. It bore no seal, only a knot of plain twine. She broke it and read words that had been written by a hand that did not often write and so wrote too hard. They said that Theon Greyjoy had done the thing men had said he had done, and then had not done it. The boys burned were not the boys that broke Catelyn Stark's sleep. They were Miller's sons, and Bran and Rickon had gone away like water down a ditch you cannot see the bottom of. Theon had been taken. He had been unmade. It was a story that did not fit any of the chambers where neat stories are stored. The person who had written the letter did not say how he knew. He said only this: "Do not let the mother break herself on a lie." Brienne looked at the bars and the lock and the torch. She went in search of the Blackfish and found him in the yard drilling men who did not need it, because drilling is a way to breathe. She gave him the letter, and he read and made a small noise that was not relief and not despair, but one of those sounds men make that let other men know a meaning has been changed and must be changed back later. "We cannot send to the twins," he said. "We cannot reach them in time with this. The river is too long when it is needed to be short." "We can pray," Brienne said, and did not know she would say it until the words were out. "We can," he agreed, without mockery, "and we can keep our own doors." That evening, the cell's words came again. They came with more men and less caution, because failure breeds foolishness as often as it breeds cunning. They found the river gate and tried the hinges. They found the postern they had been promised and discovered it had been bricked up 30 years ago by a Tully who did not trust promises. They came to the dungeon corridor and met the big maid and a man with a fish on his breast, who had taught boys to ride with their heels down before he learned to kill men without moving his feet. It was not a pretty fight. Pretty fights are for mummers. Men fell and cursed and bled and bit. Sel's words broke like rotten sticks when they learned that the men they had come to bully were not the kind they had been told. Qyburn was there, thin and watchful, old lightning in his eyes, and his hands wanting to be near blood. He had wormed his way into the company the way men like him do, by knowing the names of things that ought to be nameless and offering them as favors. He watched Brienne's blade work as if it were a question someone had asked him long ago. When it was done, Brienne stood with a cut on her forearm that would scar and a new clarity about how many men one woman can be when the space is narrow enough. Jaime sat where he always sat, but his hands were white on the iron as if he had been trying to pull the bars apart with the strength of a thought. He looked angry with himself, at himself. It was a new look for him. "Still here," he said hoarsely. "Still," she said. "Perhaps you were born to be a story," he said. "Not a very likely one, but those are the ones men remember." "I do not care to be remembered," she said. "Then you are safe," he said. "No one ever remembers the person who saved them. They remember being saved." She turned to go, But something made her stop. "The Lady Catelyn may come back with news that will break her," she said. "If she does, you are to be quiet." "I am never quiet," he said reflexively. "You will be," she said in a tone that would have made a horse lower his head. He smiled despite himself, and lifted his hands a fraction, and let them fall. At the twins, the days became a dance made of the same 5 motions. Walder demanded. Robb conceded in a way that let him keep something. Edmure tried to look dignified when he was told he would sleep in a bed that would be a bridge between houses. Men ate more than they meant to. Women served more than they were credited for. By the time the wedding day was chosen, the hall had settled into a rhythm that was wheezy and satisfied the way a badger is satisfied when it has found a chicken coop too easily. Catelyn sat with Rosalind once and learned how to speak a girl out of her fluttering. She had done it 1,000 times with Sansa and Arya, and never thought it a skill. It was. Rosalind cried a little. Catelyn did not. Rosalind said she was afraid to disappoint her father, and afraid to disappoint her new lord, and afraid of being laughed at by sisters who had learned to make laughter a weapon. Catelyn told her that her fear was a sensible thing, and that sensible things are not always useful. She told her that Edmure was a kind man, and that kindness can be a greater safety than strength worn loudly. When she rose, Rosalind touched her fingers to her sleeve like a child checking that a mother is real, and then let go again quickly, embarrassed. That night, when the hall had been cleared again, and the tables had been dragged, and the smell of old beer fought with the smell of river for the right to be called the twins' true incense, Catelyn stood a long while looking at the long floorboards, and the places where knots showed through his eyes. She felt the weight of the keys at her side, and realized she had brought them out of habit, as if she feared someone would try to unlock the river itself while she was gone, and she would have to prevent it with iron. She thought of Arya. "Where are you, little knife? How did you learn to cut through so many hands without being caught?" She thought of Sansa. "Hold on, child. Keep your pretty pride in your pocket like a handkerchief you might need, and keep the rest of you ugly if you must." She thought of Bran and Rickon. "Alive," the letter said. "Alive, alive," and did not let herself taste the word yet. She thought of Robb, who slept because he had to, and of Jean, who did not, because she had been left. She thought of Brienne and Jaime, stone and iron, iron and stone. One more day, she told herself. One more day of bread and salt and the old man's grinning, and then we cross and the river remembers us. The river remembers everything. That is its gift and its curse. It was not finished with them. It would not be finished long after the songs found a way to make what happened fit into a tune men would drink to. For now, the hall breathed. Men snored. Banners stirred a little in a draught that had lost its way. Somewhere in the tower, a rat ran over a sleeper's foot, and the sleeper dreamed of a fox and rolled over. The moon broke itself on the river and learned how to be whole again. The drawbridge creaked in its sleep. Walder Frey dreamed of counting. Robb Stark dreamed of snow and a wolf's breath that did not steam, because winter had already gone beyond breath. Morning would come, and with it, the last of the courtesies. Catelyn went to the little window that looked towards the east and the far line where the river pretended it ended. She put her forehead against the cold round of stone and let it take one more of her fevered thoughts into itself. Then she turned away and lay down in a bed that had been used by so many guests that it had learned how to forget them as soon as they left. She closed her eyes. Sleep came in pieces. When she woke, a bird was on the sill, black as the news it had brought one day, and then not. It hopped once and then flew. At River Run, Jaime closed his eyes and tried to count the sound between one drip and the next in the corridor where a leak had opened itself during the night. He made it to 30 before it fell again. 30, he said aloud, and Brienne did not tell him to be quiet. The Blackfish wrote a letter with careful strokes, and then sealed it, and then put it aside because there was nowhere to send it that would make it arrive at the right moment. Somewhere in the rainless dark between River Run and the twins, Roose Bolton stood in a tent, where the candles were so still they looked like pieces of bone stuck in wax. He inclined his head to a man whose face he might have been able to remember if he had cared to, and said something that a man could call a consent, if he needed to be able to live with himself later. He thought of leeches. He thought of songs that make excuses for men like him after the men are dead. He thought of a feast. He thought of a bride. He did not think of wolves. The river moved. The morning came. Catelyn dressed in her plainest gown and put her hair up with a practicality that had come to feel like armor. She met Robb in the hall and took his hand. His hand was large and warm and shaking a little, and still steady in the way that matters. They went in together to the day that had been set, and the music began. And Walder Frey smiled and made a joke about young men's appetites. And the salt lasted longer than the bread. And still, beneath it, the river said its single word, over and over, in the voice that water uses, when it would be heard by anyone with ears. Remember,